I love your hairdo, man.
Thanks. Hi, so this instrument is a Greek lyre. It's the type of lyre called a kithara, which is, I discovered it from going to the Getty and seeing an exhibit on ancient Greek artifacts, and saw many bearded men with curly hair playing this instrument surrounded by women in flowing robes teasing peacocks. And I thought, yeah, I need to learn that instrument and bring the Eleusinian mysteries back into modern day. So I live in Los Angeles, and this is a place where we can kind of get away with being a little extreme and radical in our artistic expression, and no one bats an eye. So, so this song was fortuitous. I decided to learn this song, and then that evening at the Levity Salon, you had mentioned this song as being an example of one of your philosophical musings. And so I thought, there's a breadcrumb, there's a synchronicity. Love it. So happy to share it with you. Thanks for offering it as a as opening of the salon. Happy to be that. Night in white satin, never reaching the end. Letters I've written, never reaching the end. Beauty I've always missed with these eyes before. Just what the truth is, I can't tell anymore, 'cause I love you. Yes, I love you. Oh, how I love you. Oh, how I love you. Gazing at people, some hand in hand, just what I'm going through, they can't understand. Some try to tell me thoughts they cannot defend. Just what you want to be, you'll be in the end, 'cause I love you. Yes, I love you. Oh, how I love you. Oh, how I love you. never meaning to sin. Beauty I've always missed with these eyes before. Just what the truth is, I can't say anymore, 'cause I love you. Yes, I love you. Oh, how I love you. Oh, how I love you.
Oh, so beautiful. Brings me back to my days and living in Southern California in Ojai and going out surfing. And when I discovered the Moody Blues in those years, in the late 80s. And thank you for bringing that back. And the philosophy in Whites and Night Satin, there's one long poetic phrase where the singer pauses and says, through love or through leisure we must go, and through leisure then comes love. And it was pointed out that we have to slow down and go to leisure, strum our lyres, and love is discovered. Love can come in, flow in like a beautiful syrup into the light of leisure. And that was the philosophy I pulled from Nights in White Satin that you picked up on, Durian. So this is a beautiful opening. Just moments ago when we were talking about this Greek lyre, which was an instrument from ancient Greece. And one of the important things that was happening in ancient Greece was on the boundary between the Upper Paleolithic and sort of even like Iron Age Europe, and the coming of what we sort of call the classical world, or the world of antiquity, where you had cities and you had societies rather than village culture. And one of the mysteries of how this happened is embodied in a school called the Great Mysteries, the Mystery School of Eleusis, which the temple complex still exists. It's north of Athens. You can get there on the bus. There's a museum to where this temple complex is. And what happened at Eleusis has eluded classicists for hundreds of years who've been studying it. Supposedly there was about a 5-6 month preparation time where people came from all over the Mediterranean, mostly by ship. And if they made it to Athens, they went through this lesser mysteries, and it was training. It was diet, simple garb like Durian is wearing right now. They shaved their heads so that if they were a high future emperor or a low fisherman, they had the rights to go through the greater mysteries, the great mystery of Eleusis, once in their lifetime. And so this is what happened. And it was a tremendous thing, because quite possibly it booted up civilization. It ran for 1,700 years. I see Sun there on her phone from the house up at Rainbow Ridge. Maybe we can let's go to grid view so we see everybody. There we go. So what happened at the Eleusis seemed to be, as described by Plato and described by others at the time, who were forbidden to reveal its secret. And Gordon Wasson and Albert Hoffman and Carl Ruck, who's a classicist from Harvard, studied the temple in the 80s. They studied they took a revisioning of it, and they believed that it was some kind of a psychedelic rite that went on after 9 days after the initiates went up into the plains of Eleusis over this bridge where the villagers of Eleusis would catcall them and try to bring them down socially, try to equalize them one last time. And then they marched on this narrow bridge into the temple complex. And then they had 9 days of celebrations, of stripping down of something that we don't even know what happened. But on the 9th evening of the 9th day, in the telesterion complex, the sunken temple, they sat, 1,000 initiates sat on a bench around the square of the temple. And women came down with these round pots on their head. And on the pots were these dishes. And the dishes contained the kaikion, the drink. And the kaikion was imbibed. And the hierophants were supervising what seemed to be a sonic, olfactory, tremendous creation and light, a show, kind of like our modern festival scene now, but way more purposefully designed. And the hierophants led the ceremony, and they took the kaikion, and 30 minutes or an hour later, Persephone herself, the great legend of Persephone rising from Hades, she rose through the light and brought life back to the earth. And this was the great myth of the Mediterranean at the time. So it was the bringing of life back itself. So Eleusis was described as a place that turned humans from human animal into human beings. It was an initiation that everyone had the right to in their lifetime. And it's thought that Eleusis created civilization. It created the theater. It created urban planning. It created the aqueduct. It created the polity. It created the three-stage, three-phase ancient Greek democratic system, which worked so well. It created mathematics. It created the academy, natural arts, and philosophy. It created all of that, came from the revealing of this great mystery of the great light come into human hearts and minds. And it was an initiation, but it was an initiation not just for villagers or simple tribes people into civilization, but it initiated the entirety of civilization. And Eleusis ran for 1,700 years, and it booted up civilization, really. And then in 396 AD, the western part of the Roman Empire was under continuous attack from the north. Cities were being sacked. It had lost its security. In Byzantium, which was later Byzantium, there had been the councils of Nicaea, and there had been 4 of them, and they were where the Christian religion, the northern Pauline branch of Christianity, had been corporatized by Constantine the Great earlier in the 4th century. And after the 4th Council of Nicaea, where they have codified a lot of it, they had whittled down the 11 Gospels to the 4, and they'd made something that was sort of acceptable to the hierarchy of the emergent apostolic church. And the Greek Orthodox had split off by that point, due to disagreements. So it was a very bureaucratic process throughout the 4th century. So what had happened, though, after the 4th Council of Nicaea, the bishops left Nicaea, and they were literally heading west, and they met Alaric, who was the Germanic tribe leader, a king from the north, who was actually headed down into the Greek peninsula to sack cities, as they did every couple of years. And supposedly they were paid by the Pauline Christians, who are described by Greek scholars as being very binary, black-robed, and extremely intolerant people, very righteous sort of people at the time. They paid Alaric to follow them. Instead of sacking the cities, they paid Alaric coin to destroy the telesterion, because that represented almost 2 millennia of prior traditions of initiation. into humanity. And they replaced the Eleusinian rite with the bureaucracy of the apostolic church, and its tax-paying, its book-based interlocution between, say, what would be the feeling, the expression of God or the real experience of God, and the person, so that there was a book and there was a structure, hierarchy between you and that experience. And that persisted for 1600 years until the Renaissance, and really until our time, until the 20th century, where the mysteries have returned, the direct contact through the medicines. And Eleusis could have been mushrooms with a Syrian rue, a kind of MAOI. It could have been an ergot kind of barley that was known to grow on the Eleusinian plain. That's what Hoffman believed. I believe that Wasson, identifying, there's a frieze, which is a stele on the temple complex. There's a piece of it in the museum, and if you look at it, there's a man holding a platter with these long, skinny things with caps on them. And classicists have declared these to be flowers for a couple hundred years, but they certainly look like psilocybin mushrooms. So in a way, what I'd like to do in opening this Levity Salon 7, which is about the revealing and healing of the human operating system and perhaps the world, is that perhaps Eleusis was a way by which people who came from the tribal world, the world of primacy of group, primacy of family, they came into a profound union with something completely alien to them, which is the power of the psychedelic experience, for one, in their cultural context, which was the myth of Persephone. But at the same time, they were able to come into union with their fellows, with the people that were with them, into love, into union of brothership and sistership, whatever it was, that they were a cohort that went through, very much like a healing school, healing art school does now, or people going for Vipassana or for medicine work, in the Amazon. They're going through it as a group and they become bonded. So instead of being bonded to tribe and to allegiance and to language, they became bonded to a cross-cultural group from all over the Mediterranean and the Levant in this process of going through the great mystery. And I believe that there was not only a healing of individuals, because certainly any initiation that we know of, iboga used in Africa and West Africa, as a tribal initiation, largely for young men, to sort of, in a sense, civilize them, to soften and round out their more young man tendencies and make them into good citizens, which was always the goal of mystery schools and initiations for tens of thousands of years. And perhaps Eleusis, as the great mystery school, was initiating humans into human beingness and into the light, and waking our consciousness and creating a almost net of being in between many cultures. And this went on for 1,700 years. You can imagine the impact that this had. And I think we see the results of it. I think we see all the great arts and the things that just seem to come from nowhere. Because in Mesopotamia, there were kingships. There were really quite violent army-led kingships from Turkey into Mesopotamia. Then there was certainly the Nile Delta and that system, which was very rigid and hierarchical. But Greece was something else, and Rome rose in respect for and copied Greece. So as Rome rose, Rome had tools that allowed it to build empire. Greece really only kind of built empire once with Alexander, sort of an accidental empire of conquest. that spread the Greek culture from, from the Khyber Pass to the Nile, an amazing event. But in a sense, we're still in that world. We're in the apostolic church. We're in the corporation, and the corporation and the state promise you a paradise upon retirement, right? In these retirement plans, and that's very much like hitting the pearly gates. If you checked all the boxes and crossed all the T's, something like that. And a hierarchy, tax paying, very book-based, very mental, which helped build the structure of civilization in certainly up until the Renaissance. But what I'd like to suggest is the HumanOS was probably intimately understood at the time of Eleusis. It was intimately understood by our ancestors. We always underestimate our ancestors. Like, we went to talks, and Michael Gosney actually make this happen, the Paradox 3 conference at Arcosanti, and Paolo Soleri was there. It was before he died. It was 2001, it was right after 9/11. And we sat there, and there was an Egyptologist presenting the discoveries on the plains of Giza, where they discovered the artisan city, the hospital, the bakery, and all the technology of how the pyramids were built, including clay slipways, all these amazing things that we underestimate our ancestors. And I think that these initiation rites that came out of the tribal world for tens to hundreds of thousands of years to tame the tendencies of mainly of young men and to create a sustainable community selected by natural selection itself, where it was embodied at Eleusis. And when we lost it, when we lost the initiation of civilization, top to bottom, we lost that. I think we lost a huge amount, because we lost, it's almost like we don't even know what we lost. And certainly the ancient world had its problems. There was widespread slavery and brutality and whatnot. It can't claim any kind of perfection, but it was a magnificent achievement, the ancient world, the time of antiquity. And Europe fell into what has been called the Dark Ages. And, it was a kind of a dark age, 700s, 800s, and you had Charlemagne, and then you had a resurgence in the 11th century in Europe, back to literacy, and they were still using the same Roman roads. No roads had been built. So I would suggest that they understood the HumanOS at a certain level. And we're coming back into the time when the powerful tools of Eleusis, if they were psychedelic rites, so they were plant medicines in stronger form, because the people had different biochemistries then, different diets, they had a different construction of the psyche, probably different sensitivities. So perhaps even just a tincture of something would create an incredibly psychoactive state. We just don't know. Just Syrian rue on its own, for example. But in our time, we've rediscovered the medicines, the elixirs, sometimes I call them. They've come back, and all the tools have come. All the tools of healing, meditation from the high Himalayas, the Tibetan Buddhists, the Dzogchen traditions, the secret teachings of these people, tremendous, incredible understanding of there's no end to the depth of their understanding of where humans go, and just listening to their chants. And we have, all these tremendous tools in the West. And we took Qigong and made it into something for us. We took the Chinese arts. I met at Esalen a year and a half ago. We did a week-long program at Esalen, and we happened to be there at the same time as Al Wong, who's the great, taught there for 52 years, the Tai Chi master and the calligrapher that taught Joseph Campbell Tai Chi and Alan Watts, and oh my goodness. And so there was this transference of these tools of all sorts. And I found myself going through my own healing of my own, what I call my little inner kindergarten. When in my 20s, I detected a hard knot in my system that was painful. It's like, wow, what the heck is that? So all through my 20s, I was writing a lot of code and everything, and it was like, there's this hard knot here. And I feel like there's a shell of concrete around me. So I started going to encounter groups. Probably many of you remember these from the 80s. And that was to break the concrete shell, the encounter group, to have emotion with other people present. It's a big deal. And our encounter group was in the middle of the AIDS crisis. So several of the members died in the year that I was in the group. And it led to a lot of emotion about that. It was very deep and profound, that time in Los Angeles. And then my own journey was, what on earth is this hard knot? So in the 90s, I met Terrence McKenna, and so he introduced me to his elixir path, and I introduced him to virtual worlds as an alternate reality. And then I experienced his worlds that I avoided until I was 37. And I realized that, wow, this is a whole landscape, I felt that it was a landscape for my own healing, first and foremost. And when I went to the jungle for the first time to drink the tea, I actually had what I call an endo trip, which is a incredible visual storm that's flowing, that's endogenous, it's made entirely inside. The night before the exo trip, which would have been the first drinking of the tea. And it was a raging endo trip. And at one point, it's like 2 hours of this. I say, dudes, all of you, all the visuals, all of the story, all the things, you're going to go into this little corral that I'm building for you, because I don't want you guys to be active when I meet this medicine for the first time. I want you to be quiet and out of the picture, because this trip is about my healing. There's something much more important than all this visuals and story and form. And as a result, my journey with ayahuasca for many years was to soften that little hard knot, to discover that it was an unborn embryo, a metaphorical unborn embryo, because I was given up at birth. And in a way, it was another angle on the rupture or the severance that happened when the baby is taken from the mother and put in that adoption ward with zillions of other babies, because it was 1962, and never sees the mother again, never smells them, never sees their face, never hears the voice. They're in a bardo. They're thrown into a bardo, which I was, and there were wonderful caring nurses, undoubtedly. I went back to that room, that very room 5 years ago when my biological father was dying in that hospital. I asked, was there a room where the babies were born in the 60s? And the nurse said, you're lucky, because this one wing of the hospital hasn't been torn down. It's an oncology ward. Just take this elevator and go up to the top floor. So I went up to the top floor and I walked into the very room that most certainly I was born or placed in those first 11 days. There was one guy in a bed, and he was about, say, 48, 50. And I said, hey, I think I was born in this room. And he looked up to me and he said, I know I was born in this room, and I'm going to die in this room. And we both had a kind of a smile. It's a very Canadian thing, right? This is in Victoria. It's like, oh yeah, that's totally appropriate. So that was perhaps the source of that knot of pain. And in the process of healing that pain, or discovering the great mystery of that pain and rebirthing it as myself, as a globular baby over 2 nights working with the shaman, in that process, I met my inner kindergarten. I met all the little parts of personality, the little worried mental part that wants to be heard and seen all the time, cycling thought. the body part that's always getting constricted by the mental part. Because when you start, I started thinking my body is stops breathing. And then there's the heart part that's not seen much, not felt. And then there was that little not part. And I thought to myself, this is in 2011, I'm made up of this entire freaking inner kindergarten. And the first teaching of the madre, of the medicine, was take a look down inside you now. What do you see? And I saw this crazy kindergarten of these little kids running around. And I said, everyone just stop, time out. Like, I just wanted to address them. And they looked up and they stopped. And I was free. I was liberated. In the way that Buddha was liberated, I went into this kind of peace of, oh, wow, it just went completely peaceful and quiet and something. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, everyone just chill out, And so for days I was driving the bus and they were all in the back seats of the bus. And every time the mental one came up, it would come right to the front of the bus, blah, 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 blah. And I said, duly noted. Now you can go back and sit next to the body part and hug the body part. I'll give you some love. But I'm driving the bus. You're not taking me over and driving the bus. There's now a new me that is separate from all you guys. And every time you try to take over my voice and my thoughts and my emotions, I become you or combination of you. And then I start to be a kind of a lesser me, and it's not cool. Even though you guys want to take over my voice and you want to take over my mind and the whole thing and make the little me just run the thing, and it's fun for a while maybe, but really it doesn't lead to better outcomes. And they kind of got that message. Now that's still happening to me today. I mean, Catherine can tell you, when I fall into the little me, the little boy me, but I have a point of view of that I've fallen into the little boy me. And I joined after the medicine work, I joined the Luminous Awareness Institute. I've been working in it for, 4 or 5 years or so. And this is what we work on. And I realized, I heard that discovered there were names for these things. There was a practice called internal family systems developed by Richard Schwartz, who was a family counselor in the 80s. He'd been a family counselor for years, and he kept hearing members saying, part of me wants to leave this marriage, but part of me wants to stay in. And he realized that people are multiple parts. Now, this is an old idea from way back to Carl Jung, Fritz Perls. It's an old classic idea that we're a society of mind, that we're all these interacting parts. So Dick Schwartz's genius in internal family systems was to say, it's not just about the subpersonalities that appear, it's about the relationships between the parts, the ongoing interactive relationships, almost like an operating system. This is my term for it. And in Luminous, I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years that, so Luminous has adapted IFS and many other practices. And I learned that there's something called a wounded part, a part that's deeply wounded, that Eckhart Tolle called the pain body. And in the late 80s and early 90s, he used to trigger the pain body in his clients, record them with a little handheld mic, and then play back the kind of eruptions that came out as the clients actually dissociate. And there's a part that comes out of them and start screaming or doing something. And he would play the recordings back, and the clients would be like, that came out of me. It doesn't even sound like my voice. And it was a huge awakening for the clients and for Eckhart. And Eckhart, his work then went on into this understanding of that the pain body is many, many different flavors and varieties, and that the pain body is wounds that occur at different ages of young kids into teenage years. And that those wounds, once they're in there, there's a mechanism to protect them, to wrap a shell around them, to prevent the wound from being touched, the little being. And then that protector shell has all these abilities to do things to protect. It talks to managers and doers. So sometimes if somebody's going into a triggered state, what's been noticed over the years by many practitioners is that suddenly the client gets busy with something, like organizing something on the table. And that's because the doer, Wilhelm Reich's work, as Gino points out, the doer is now part of the coping mechanism. And in Luminous, what we learn is to attune and track all this in each other to a level where, I mean, Annalisa Delberg and Raina Delir, their attunement levels are just extraordinary. They can attune to multiple parts, multiple wounds and protectors doing their thing, whether it's energetically in the body, emotions are coming up, words are even coming up. Their attunement and tracking ability is so amazing. And they can do little things, it's really just slight movements, slight questions, to allow that system to start unwinding, because the part that is the wound really wants resource. It wants to be seen. And when you're with a group of 100 people, and we're all working on the hysteric wound, which is when love was unreliable, it was hot one day and cold the next. You know, yes, you're my princess. Now you're my worst nightmare. You know, and the hot, cold love creates the hysteric wound. And the hysteric wound actually is at the root of a lot of our great artists, musicians, performers. If you watch any film where there's great acting, it's probably lots of hysterics in there. I had a hysteric wound. And when you have a wound, the parts are so exquisitely adapting to protecting the being from that wound getting re-triggered, that you become, you have to develop superpowers in a certain area. So for the hysteric wound, that could be performance, that could be what we sometimes call realm bending or realming, where you go into fairy worlds, where your consciousness can travel, you can get downloads. And so a superpower is always associated with the personality complex that develops around these wounds. And there's the rigid wound, which is parents saying, what, only 95% on the test, you don't get love from me. You know, that's very common in Silicon Valley now, and it's common in Asia, it's common in parts of the world like Europe. It's a conditional love. So people are on this asymptotic curve of never being good enough, never being good enough. And it's a lot of employees in Silicon Valley companies are on that rigid path. The liberated rigid is what in our practice we call the crystal bender. They can associate thousands of things in a download from a crystal. They can be the greatest controller, the greatest coder, the person at Costco that knows every SKU and the price on them. That's crystal bending. Because that's what they train into in order to get love. And there's several other of these. There's the schizoid, which I found out that I have just in the last year. The schizoid is injury early on, bodily injury, shock to an infant system, and then people leave the body. So they're kind of, they can be a little bit wraith-like, and their consciousness goes way the heck out here, and their conscious field is far out, and they dissociate. And I found that I thought it was a realming dissociation, but I actually have a schizoid wound where I am leaving my body all the time. Like I have to come back. Now it's my superpower in that the schizoid wound has allowed me to send my consciousness through billions of years of time to work on the early Earth, to visualize the early Earth and the conditions in those pools that might have led to life, or travel onto the surface of Mars, seeking the best way to land origami spacecraft to pick up rocks so we can look for life there. So the combination of the realm bending hysteric wound and the schizoid dissociative air capability gave me that, if you mix them together. So you can see that these parts and the complex human OS that is running what's called our personality, and you can actually scan Donald Trump, for example, very closely, and you watch him in his cycles and his repeating things, and he's fairly transparent. I mean, that's one of the great things about Trump, is he's absolutely transparent, so he can be tracked and attuned to really easily. I want to open it up soon for questions here, but the great joy that I have as a result of this work, perhaps this studying of the history and wondering, as a young nerdy kid on the spectrum, I couldn't look people in the eye. I couldn't look people in the eye until my 30s. You know, I was definitely on that spectrum. And, but for me, it's been a long climb out of that Asperger's or whatever. You know, they didn't have a diagnosis for that in the 60s, which is good for me because I would have been put in the special class and might have had a lot more fun. I don't know. There's no diagnosis for autism spectrum then, or it's just beginning. But I have great joy because for me, people were a mystery. They were opaque. You know how they talk about nerds saying they can deal with Unix operating systems and big network things like that, and that's easy. But human personality is a mess, right? So nerds don't want to go near it. Like, no one's ever going to figure this out. Well, we are figuring it out. We are figuring it out, and we're figuring out how to read our own boot code, so we can figure out how we boot up and why we are the way we are every morning. Like, I wake up often in the mornings with this feeling of downness and dread, and it's a part. And there's a feeling of great fatigue in this time. And 2 days ago, I thought, well, maybe the fatigue isn't just my body being tired. Maybe it's an actual part. And so I went to look for it, and I found fatigue as an entity inside me. And I said to her, how do I give you a resource? What do you need? What love do you need? Because if it's a part, then I can do a self-parenting thing. I can take it on, and I can resource and heal myself by just recognizing those parts and giving them what they didn't get. And so now my fatigue is lifting just with that recognition that the fatigue wasn't maybe a medical issue. It was actually a part that was deeply wounded from probably too much rushing around for years and years. And it finally got to have its say in February when coronavirus started. It said, God damn it, I'm tired. You have run the system into the ground, and me too, and I'm going to have my say about it. And it's just another part. So the great news for the human future is that if we can reveal the human OS, our own OS, and the fundamental OS underneath human beings, that is the cause of all the world's ills and greatness. We can treat symptoms by saying corporations should do this and that, or we need to refactor blah, blah in the economy, but that's all a symptom of the core root thing of how do people boot up in the morning. When they go to that office and they operate through fear, they operate through anxiety, they operate through withdrawal and caging, and then that's reflected in organizations, which then create these shells that operate that way to the world and create corporate cultures or governments or tribal or whatever. All comes from in here, guys. It comes from this boot code. So we get at the boot code and we allow individuals, give them the tools to just have a look at their code. And when they have the first look at, because everyone suffers, everyone has some part that's just driving them crazy. And once they start seeing that, they're no longer the part. They're no longer coming from that. And if they go on inquiry and then they seek, I'd like to really relieve that. That when that's relieved, I feel so much better. And then groups can come around with all these tools and help them to do that. And that's the great revolution. I think that's the great technology of the 21st century, is this work. And it's being taken up by amazing people all around. I mean, I see people I know from IONS. I see people from the psychedelic world. You know, Luke is here, who's seeking to create a huge center for investment in psychedelics, psychedelic business that is not coming from traumatized psychopathy of the finance world, which drives companies. And if we can get investment that does not come from that kind of competitive, fear-based, boy-based kind of behavior, we'll get different companies. If we can refactor that, and we'll actually outcompete, you know, the Goldman Sachs of the world if we do it better. And we do it from an enlightened, heartfelt, very wise base. And we'll have a whole bunch of psychedelic medicine companies that are really different beasts than would have otherwise been. Back to Eleusis, and that will allow our Eleusinian return to be done from a wisdom core and a heart core and a healed core. So I'm happy because we're on the cusp of the greatest discovery, which is how we work, how we tick, and tools to allow us to hack our systems, or whatever you call it, soothe and heal, male and female rebalance, the child within, the medicine work, all these just tremendous tools. There's never been a time like it. And through Zoom here and through this corona coming together of the Paleolithic tribe or of the planet, we actually slowed down long enough to allow leisure, a little bit of slowing down, and to allow the love of one another to emerge, and then to consider our future before we get back onto this treadmill that is so distracting for what really is important. And perhaps we will not go on the same treadmill as we were on for decades. And with that, people are no longer a mystery. We learned who we were at a mystery school, but we actually are no longer a mystery to each other. And we can no longer say, well, they're just that way, and accept it. Or wouldn't it be nice if, or wouldn't it be, we have this fantasy of, I felt so good when I was at Burning Man, why do I not feel good the rest of the year? You're not a mystery either. You're decodable. And with decoding comes recoding and rebooting and refactoring, and do it again and again, and it eventually sticks. And we can all be better human beings enjoying the miracle of 4 billion years of beautiful evolution on this gorgeous world that we're in from this point on. So with that, I think I've gobbled up a whole bunch of time here. So let's open the floor, and I think Shen-Shen's got advice as to what to do.
Thank you, Bruce, for that lovely share and description of what I feel like is the energy body. It's not just the energy body, but just like you said, like the Renaissance. So I think what the best way to proceed would be, if you'd like to ask a question or contribute something to the discussion, raise your hand via Zoom. There's a button. If you open up the participants menu, you should see a button to raise your hand. You can also raise your physical hand, and I will keep my eye on it. But the digital hand, I think, will be easiest. Durian, I see you've raised your hand.
Hi, so Bruce, I heard you say that it was part and parcel of your trauma and your healing of your wounds that actually gave you superpowers. So it seems like the wounded healer, or through confronting and working through your trauma, it actually made you stronger, more capable in a certain way. So do you think that having some trauma is a necessary prerequisite to developing integrated superpowers kind of thing?
You know, that's a very good question, because in those upper Paleolithic villages, or even in the tribes in Africa, were we carrying those traumas 6 million years ago when Ardipithecus walked the rainforest floor? Were we made up of those parts? You know, where did these things may have incredibly deep roots? And what we find with animals is if there's a traumatic event, it can actually leave an enduring pattern. But animals can also be extremely flexible and come out of it. Like they're being chased by the cheetah, and the gazelle uses up all of its muscular power but survives, and it does this great shaking. If the cheetah doesn't catch it, it shakes off the trauma. It just blows it off, and it goes on, because if it carried the trauma, it wouldn't survive. So I think the animal kingdom is good at kind of shaking off, dealing with things and shaking them off quickly, unless you, of course, close the door on your cat's paw, and it will always come to the door with its paw up like this, like, yeah, right, you closed the door on me 10 years ago. But perhaps the fact that humans can carry trauma, and that we're so deep, and that we have memory, and that we have this huge memory system, has allowed us to become super animals. Because if you carry a trauma and then you have to cope with it, and it's a psychical thing, it's not a muscular trauma, it's not an injury, it's something deeper. It forces adaptation, and it forces evolution. So the great musician or storyteller emerges from the core of that trauma the moment that they made the adults in the tribe laugh, and they realize they have a voice and they can be seen if they can be funny. So you get Robin Williams, you know, as a result. But Robin Williams carried a deep trauma until his death, a deep hysteric wound. So perhaps the fact that we can carry trauma means we can become superpower beings. And it all matters. And so in some sense, the trauma gave us the superpowers in the first place, because it's something very deep, and it has the coping mechanism is very energetically very structured for each of these. If that makes sense.
I'm just reminded of the first of Buddha's Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. Well, maybe that's a code for deal with it, and you will discover your Buddha nature. You know.
Yeah.
And Christianity, of course, is, you know, bear the burden, carry your cross, deal with it. Life, you know, is going to hurt, and the way that you carry yourself through that is going to build character, or, you know, just exercising itself is a form of trauma, right? Resistance training, learning how to negotiate, mediation, conflict resolution, all of these build character and capabilities.
Thank you, Dorian.
Yeah.
Before we go to James, I just wanted to comment. It reminds me of the Rumi quote. The wound is the place where the light enters you. I think that speaks to the same thing. James, would you like to go next?
Can you hear me right now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the time that you took, Bruce, to explain everything in a very elegant and thorough manner. I appreciate you taking as much time as you like. It's a pleasure to listen to you. My question is, I guess it's a little bit, if I look at my own mind analytically, it is a little bit fear-based, and I recognize that. But the question is also, it is concerned, and I am concerned with the sort of process or the place that we're at in the process globally, which is probably, the macro and the micro work together as a reflective state of being. So where we're kind of like at with the global crisis, the environmental position we're in, and it concerns me when you have all these sort of, the world leaders and the corporations and the disharmony with their sort of, I think you understand what I'm saying probably. I'm like, with the picture that you're painting of this sort of new accessibility to this OS, this healing that's viable in this moment right now, in this time in our history, it seems that it's we're right neck and neck with the destruction at the same time. So I'm wondering, where's that tipping point? Where do you see in your sort of analytical talents of us being able to come into an awakening or healing, as you're expressing it, fast enough for us to then transfer this on to our relatives that we are the stewards of in this global sort of place right now? I don't know. I mean, like, the earth and all of this sort of like other beings may just say, well, you guys have had your time. You don't have the ability to establish homeostasis, so you and the virus can both go fuck yourselves and like be done with it all. I don't know. I'd like to hear what you think about that. I hope I've expressed my question clearly enough.
Thank you, James. It's actually the question of the day and the hour and the century, this very question. And one could view it like all good Hollywood thrillers. There's a car chase at the end, and the good guys are chasing the bad guys, or the bad guys are chasing the good guys, or something. There's this dramatic denouement that happens. But truthfully, the thriller couldn't be possible without the two forces pushing against each other. And sometimes it flips, where the bad cop flips and becomes the good cop, and the criminal is no longer the criminal, they're the rescuer. Those are the greatest dramas when we see that. And years ago at the Earth Frequency Festival in Australia, I was asked the same question, James. And what came into my mind was two hands going up. A little bit like my silver spire diagram that we shared, I think, in the previous Levity Salon. They were going up, and I said, what on earth are those? And one of the hands is the visible trauma, the fake news, the anxiety, the leads it bleeds, the kind of thing that is in our face all the time, that we're giving ourselves for whatever reason. We're giving ourselves all this negative, shaky story. But on the other side, and mostly invisible, is this other force that is pushing up against it. But they're married. They're growing together. So as the echo chamber gets more shrill, so does the number of people who are meditating into calmness, who no longer tie into that echo chamber and have wisdom on it. And they're growing together. They're co-evolving. And they're co-evolving rapidly. And it's like the yin and the yang, or it's like the Jedi. I think when Yoda said something like, Jedi need powerful empire to grow skills. So you need to have the strong empire you're fighting against in order to become a powerful Jedi. You need a powerful force that you're trying to weave through. And the Jedi develop their skills with a powerful opponent, in a sense. So perhaps the equilibrium we can actually bring to it is to realize that it isn't all the bad doom and gloom story. There are powerful Jedi and there are powerful forces at work all over the place. We can tell each other that story. Maybe we're doing it in secret. We're doing it quietly amongst ourselves. We're doing our practices. We turn on the news and it's like, what? It's craziness. And we walk out on the street and we don't see the craziness. And we realize that the craziness is mental constructs and story and this flow through. And that craziness can bring, it's a nemesis, as Jan Ballard is pointing out. It can bring crazy action into reality. So we actually have to become samurai, Jedi. We have to face it down. We have to call it out for what it is. And we have to not let it come into our hearts and take us over and take our coin, extract from us. And it's a skill that we can develop, and we can develop it with our children and our communities and our common sense. But we have to actually evolve in the onslaught of this thing. And you know, when there's an earthquake, when the Bay Area had the big earthquake, Loma Prieta in 1989, I was in Southern California, but I know Son and Allan, I think, were here, and a few of you experienced that. And if you went to Oakland after the Nimitz freeway structure, the two-story Nimitz freeway had collapsed, all these thousands of people showed up from the Oakland community and tried to help. And they self-organized, and homeless people directed traffic. And people softened, and people looked at each other in the eye. Everyone was leveled, just like the Eleusinian initiates. Their humanity came out. They helped each other. And in some sense, a pandemic like this has done some of that for us. The next one that comes that is more deadly, which there will be, will do a bit more. And it's a shaping or a winnowing down. And it, like evolution, the evolution is going to choose, and Darwinian natural selection is going to choose the healthy ones that make it through. And however that looks, in 2100, evolution will have chosen a civilization for us based on our response, but based on this gigantic, almost field shaping of probability that's happening, that's so large we can't even see it. It's shaping us. I believe it's shaping us so that the two hands clasping will push up ever higher until they merge like this, until they blur back and forth. And that millennials and younger people, they have a good view on this because they see this crazy back and forth of culture wars in this country. And they just like, it's just nonsense to them. In some sense, the millennial communities that I'm part of see all through that, and they just don't care for it. They hope it goes away. They're riding to the next point. So as the combatants fall away, you know, perhaps the boomers and the Gen X and, you know, my generation, they fall away, they're taking over and they're more merging this thing. They're saying, yeah, there is the shadow and there is the light, and we dance between them and we do our practices and we own them both. And perhaps the next generations are going to deal with this thing and push the evolution towards survival.
Thank you.
And feel free, anyone. I know Sandy Kay had to go to bed, and Aliza had to leave us. So perhaps some of you are getting pretty late. Do you want to pop in? And I promise I'll...
Bruce, I'd just like to say one thing, which is that, you know, underlying everything that, particularly since we got to be at the IONS thing together and think through that whole thing about the field, has it all worked out ahead of time, that our choice is actually to just be a yes a priori. And I found that that's the most powerful place to be in, is no matter how bad it looks, to go, okay, what's the gift of spirit here? What is my opportunity? And I know personally in the last couple of years, I've had several of the, you know, what could sound or look like the worst things, you know, that could happen, you know, or bad things that happened, but the magic that came from them was impossible to imagine any other way. And it's just all part, it's all a whole. And if we're saying yes, then we're not questioning the field. We're just loving it and thanking it, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense. So thank you for modeling that relationship with the field. And it's really been a great thing for me, particularly since we connected in July. Thanks.
Thanks, Jan.
I guess I will ask you one question about Eleusis. And thank you so much for that. I've heard many pieces of that, but never have I heard that whole thing all so coherent. So that was really a privilege to hear that from you. What do you think how did Eleusis know the end was coming? I mean, you know, were they just completely unprepared, or were they knowing that the run was? Did you know anything about how the ending occurred?
The the records of that time are not good because the West was entirely in shreds. So you basically had a lot of monastic orders. You had a lot of people holding knowledge, but it was there's not a lot of good historians from that time in the West anyway. But there's some wonderful books. If you you can get these books online, all about the Eleusinian mystery, and Persephone's quest is one. It's been quite a topic, and you can actually look at all the archaeology. It's all available, which is Nick Herbert, who's a great friend of ours, a physicist here in the area, a friend had been to Eleusis, and he gave me a shell that was actually from the bench seat. It's somebody who had gone into the Telesterian temple, and these blocks were where people sat, and probably where like Cleopatra took a leak or something, or Augustus Caesar. And this shell was from that block. And so I put it into a little Greek pot that had a wonderful festival going guy with all of his hair, you know, a Greek picture looks like durian on it. And I would take it out when I would talk about Eleusis, and inside also is an acorn from a tree from the temple complex, and pass it around, and people could touch this. But I don't know why I got off on that, but it's just a real touchstone for me, is that history.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. The miracles are so all around us if we can see them. This photograph to my right, I took in the Swiss Alps one night with the sun was creating this sort of light for about 2 hours. It's suspended over the valley. And just like that stuff's happening all the time when we are able to see it. Thanks for modeling that, Bruce.
You're welcome.
So next up we have Gino, Zorg, and then Allan.
Hey, Bruce. Really wonderful talk, and really brings us back to, you actually cover a lot of different points. Harking back to the experiment we did at Burning Man, I actually remember before we did the experiment that this whole presence versus thought thing and the importance of eye contact. And it's just been, I don't know if you remember that talk, but there was an issue of why are you pushing so hard in terms of all the different projects that you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there was a challenge. I was trying to, well, a little bit of the difference between us was this whole push towards understanding the beginning of man, or of life and everything, versus kind of this inner approach. And I was like, hey, you have all of this knowledge, let's explore this inner thing. But you're like, well, I've got all of these different projects, and part of it is kind of choosing one. And then for me, just seeing that the topic, which is kind of why I jumped in, it was right after, ironically, it was right after a funeral. I just attended a funeral. There's a guy named Boz, some of you may know him, that passed away in a car accident. Well, it's that when I saw the topic, I was just really kind of inspired, and I'm really, really happy to see you coming into this space. I threw a couple links in there related to Wilhelm Reich's work, who was really the one that was looking at the development of the psyche and the physiology and understanding that correlation. And arguably that's the basis for all of this consciousness hacking stuff and transformational technology of really looking at the physiology and the psychology. And once you have something in physiology, arguably it's it's objective and it's measurable. And related to the emotion, one of the big things, you talked a little bit about the Tibetan side, but then there's this whole process of Eastern traditions and the relationship between physiology and emotional state. Most of you may know, but if I ask you to breathe deeply from your belly, just a deep belly breath, if I ask you to breathe deeply from your belly and try to feel angry at the same time, it's very difficult. Anger is a chest breath, fear is a held breath. And if you're relaxed and you're in parasympathetic or even flow, then you can actually breathe, your diaphragm isn't tightened up, and you can actually breathe deeply. And you also may be aware that if you're very present, if you're aware and if you're making eye contact and aware of things that are happening, like Max Friedman returning and all of these things, from your peripheral vision, you can be aware of what you see, you can be of what you hear, but you can always also be aware of your breath. And if you're aware of your breath, you're always aware of your emotional state. And part of this grounding thing is cultivating greater interoceptive awareness and this living from presence. And so if you're present, you're always aware of your breath. You're always aware of the subtle things that are happening in your physiology. And if you then motivate the action from joy, wonder, and gratitude, which somatically feel very different from fear, need, and desire, then your whole relationship with reality changes. That's the premise. And then related to Durian's, Durian is I think it was him, the need for the trauma to kick you out is, and part of that is because the trauma is so hard in the physiology, you flee into the energy body, you flee into the kind of this astral realm, and then you say, hey, I'm kind of comfortable here. And at that time, the reason why it's difficult to make eye contact with people is because when you do make eye contact and speak, there's a connection, there's a resonance between the physiologies, and anything that the other person is holding that your physiology can't hold, and if you go very deep in high energy, you have to be able to have the emotional flexibility to be able to go to wherever that goes. And that can be terrifying for some because it can reopen the old wounds. But the premise is at the core of this is, at the very core of your being, within everyone's, is this right here, right now, it's good to be alive experience. And joy, wonder, and gratitude comes from all of that. And if you connect deeply to that, and if you can let go of all story, that's the premise, and that's what enables stillness. And the thing is that if I have a block, let's say I have early trauma, and if I can't source my energy from the innate joy of being, and the physiology is constantly moving to higher energy states, I'm going to look outward here, and then that's the whole premise for developing these gifts. But the inner work of bringing in forgiveness for that, to reconnect to the innate joy of being, which can be difficult. I mean, there are triggers. I mean, the last time I spent with Bruce, he was going through relationship issues at the time. And it's difficult, right? What is it that takes you out of kind of joy, wonder, and gratitude? And for me, it's just been really amazing to see the kind of the development through this and towards kind of this inner path and focusing on the inner. And I'm just really, it's wonderful to see and really happy to be here with you.
Thank you, Gino. And I think we're all on, the beautiful news is we're all on a version of this path. And one of the secret practices that I've discovered in the last 2 years that's helped me greatly is what you talked about in terms of attention to breath, and what Eckhart Tolle talks about. And everyone seems to when you do meditation. But what I've done is I do this practice in the mornings where I do the belly breath. Then I do a pastrika, sort of pulling down. It pumps my system with oxygen and also pushes my mind off. Literally, every time I pump down, I ask the mind to go a little farther away from me. So when I finish 3 rounds of pastrika, I'm in the body. I'm on the earth and I'm oxygenated. Then I'll do a mantras like oming to pull energy up. And then I'll do the pranayama breath work, slow, medium, and fast. But what I added on the end of the pranayama breath work was a mantra, a wailing song. So as I do my last slow, medium, fast, up into almost breath of fire, I take it off the top. I think Aaron's smiling because we've done this together, over into a wail. And the wailing, my model for the wailing is Grace Slick from Jefferson Airplane. Just her powerful voice that can open the energy vortex. If you ever listen to her in Jefferson Airplane songs. And that was an Eleusinian return, if there ever was one. So I go into that wail, and what the wail allows is the energetic, like almost the physiology, Gino, that you were talking, an opening in the physiology for my little parts, my inner kindergarten, to come up. And as I finish the wailing, I start to sing a mantra, and then I start to sing almost a lullaby to them. And as I'm singing to them, they're all chilling. Because what does a kindergarten do when a teacher's telling a story or singing? They just sit there and they chill. And it's a gift to them, and they feel resourced all at once, all of them. And usually what happens is one of them will put their hand up, like you're doing here. And it like 2 days ago, it was a great sadness came in. The sad part put their hand up in the kindergarten class and like, I'm sad. And so then the singing went to the sad part. So then the singing became sad. The singing became attuned to that sadness. And then the sadness, it releases and becomes resourced. And it feels seen. And often each day it could be a different part. There's a different one comes up, but I give my inner kindergarten that chance once in the morning. It could be any time of day, really, to get resource and get sung to and heard, and the body's in good shape. And when I finish the breath work, I give myself a hug. So like there's a physical, they're feeling all my parts and my physiology, my body feels the compression of the hug. And by gosh, it really works, you know. And when I get up, it's only been 15 minutes, but I'm a different being. And doing this again and again and again, for years and years, it has started to set in and soften my system so that the physiology, the parts and wounds, the story is silenced as well. And you're just coming into the innate joy of being for a moment. And Gino, one of the discoveries was, I find the innate joy of being for me is opening up when I take that big belly breath and I hold it for 6 counts, then push it out, hold down for 6 counts, and then I take the belly breath again, holding, and as I do that, and as the breath of life actually powers my system up, I feel the innate joy of being. It just comes from the holding of breath. And then the up breath becomes more of a hunger for air. And when you satisfy the hunger for that air and are holding it, there's a joy throughout the system that you took the air in and you're now holding it. It's an affirmation of life itself, the holding of that breath. And that's how the practice has continued to evolve to get me into these states early in the day so that I'm not running from the parts and from story and worry all through the day. But it doesn't mean I won't drop into that. But if I drop into the parts and story in the day, my breath is more present. Oh, the breath isn't held as much. So it helps me to let go of that attachment. So
one more thing, during that period, you were also talking about hermeneutic circles, which is kind of like this, what we're doing now, yeah?
yeah. Thanks, Gino, for bringing all that back, all that history back, reminding me. Did we have Zorg next?
We have Zorg.
Hi. Yeah, Bruce, I love what you said about how much we underestimate our ancestors. And also, I think we underestimate, as you say with the Yoda thing, both their capacity and the incredible challenges that they faced. I think what's so difficult for so many people right now in our time is the unknown. We don't know if a vaccine is possible for this virus. We don't know if COVID-21 will be even more lethal. We have such an uncertain future. But, you know, with the plague of the Justinian plague, literally half of the population of Europe died. And they knew so much less about what was causing it. They had so few tools to understand what was going on. And even for our parents' generation, with World War II, you know, literally the world, people trying to kill each other, it was a world war. And yet, you know, we have survived those things. And there's a wonderful essay I recommend to people by Charles Eisenstein called The Coronation, which is talking about how it's remarkable how much global cooperation we are seeing around this virus. And it's remarkable that just at the time when we're required to isolate, all these tools like Zoom and so forth are enabling us to connect in ways that we haven't connected before. And certainly these technologies will get better now because we need them to be better. But, you know, we have an enormous opportunity now to cooperate in problem solving at a global scale. The global human collective really can work together now in ways that were simply technologically not possible before. And so, you know, as bad as global warming is, et cetera, you know, we have these enormous opportunities to create our own future because the old thing's gone away.
I think in a previous Levity Salon was brought up that a new nervous system booted up between 2010 and 2019. There was smartphones and Zoom and broadband and all that, just in time for this global crisis to test out the nerves, the neurons, the brain, the tools, to see, hey, you know, if we had had this in 1995, there would have been very little connectivity, no coordination around travel or testing, or very difficult. The nervous system wasn't in place, and now it is, and we see that it works.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find a link to that essay and put it in the chat.
Thanks, Org.
Sure.
Keep playing the dig.
Well, and in fact, that's something that I've actually, just on a personal note, had to come to terms with, the fact that sitting in a room with a bunch of people blowing my particles at them, you know, people aren't going to want that. You know, it's over. Sound healing through a didgeridoo in a retirement home is like, let's get the guy in to come and kill us. So they know. So, you know, but that's something that you know, it took me a while, but yeah, I've come to accept. Well, okay, you know, there are other forms of healing and other places I can play the didgeridoo, like out in the woods, you know.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, by the way, Zorg, I dropped a link to the essay in the chat for you from Charles Eisenstein. And next up, we have Allan Lundell.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Bruce.
Good evening.
I have a comment, a question, and an offer for the gang. comment is that the Aleutian mystery is quite fascinating to our whole community, so thanks for bringing that up. And there was a group of goddesses that went to the ancient sites, Demeter and Persephone in Greece last year, and did sacred ceremony there to see if we can get a modern revealing of what those mysteries might be about. And I'd be happy to share that with you later, the details of that. So that's my comment. My question regards the idea of the HumanOS, as you referred to it. Now, how far can we take the computer analogies in understanding something as complex as human consciousness? I mean, are we like, are some people Windows OS and others like Mac? Or is that, is there a species operating system, that reply, as if so, is that means, is there a mammalian operating system as well? I mean, how far can we take this, do you think?
Well, just the other day, Catherine and I were listening to a wonderful podcast featuring Joe Dispenza. And I don't know if you guys have followed his work. He's often at the SAND conference, and he's sort of a guy on the edge of neuroscience and the real front, sort of far edge. What they are doing is they have groups of people, kind of like Mikey Siegel's work with the heart sync. So Joe Dispenza became an advisor to Heart Math here in Boulder Creek years ago. Learned about all these tools to heart rate monitoring and the connection with emotional states and things. But what they found is if the group or an individual goes into a heart space, and there's a lot of neurons in the heart, and they feel a clarity in the heart, an openness to the heart, and then a clear intention from the mind, they can sort of non-locally pattern feelings and expression and stuff like that. And they're starting to do sort of A/B testing on this. And IONS, as an organization, Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I met Juliana last July at the conference. IONS has done this for almost 43, 44 years. They've trying to ask the question, is there something that's sort of an energetic shell around people that's somehow related to the heart, somehow related to the mind, where people can be non-locally connected, where people can have visions downloading from somewhere, where they can have insights about someone across the world that may be in trouble, and at the very moment they're in trouble. All the twin studies, all based on Edgar Mitchell's experience on Apollo 14 and his samadhi in space that we've talked about. That there's many groups that are now saying, wow, is there a technology here? Is there an OS that's a super meta OS that we're all in? Is there an OS internally that's somehow connected to that OS? What is consciousness? And this is the golden age of this inquiry. Our work on the origin of life, and you've heard me talking about it earlier, I'm actually writing a draft for a book that I'm going to be sharing perhaps with the group, but initially with Charles Brownstein, that I'm writing this draft. It's for a book on conscious entrepreneurship. But these 4 questions that we're filling out, that Catherine and I are both doing for a friend named Tommy Lorsch, who's publishing a book on conscious entrepreneurship. The 4 questions have me now crystallizing how I feel that the discoveries at life's origins are somehow related to this OS, that they somehow, that all of our experience and our non-local or sort of parapsychological experiences and our mental experiences and our body-centered experiences, they're all running on a substrate called life. Any OS needs to have hardware to run on, and it's called the living world. So if we understand the living world from a different perspective, what powers cells from the fundamental level on a moment-by-moment basis down to their molecular level? And we think we've discovered that it's a patterning between energy inputs, which primarily on the Earth is solar radiation every time the sun rises, powers a 3-way system that writes and reads memory, that shapes probability by having improbable interactions occur, and all of cells crowd molecules together to make improbable events probable. And then a network effect across cells, whether they be chemical messaging. You know, the virus is a huge chemical networking system. And neurons are a networking system, and our technology is a networking system. And that really it's memory, probability, and networking are the three pinions underneath everything from life's origins that we see we see the protocells forming in a petri dish or in a hot spring and gathering together and polymers growing. We now see that in our New Zealand samples. We got the AFM imagery back from Denmark, and there they are. There's the tangles, and there's the viroid-sized circles of DNA that we formed through wet-dry cycling on mica sheets in New Zealand in February. There they are. And perhaps from the mitochondria, which are the energy centers that are spinning, and of course the chloroplasts, everything that's going on in the cell is a driving engine that fundamentally shapes probability, and that it also grows a network, and it also rides upon this continuous wave of writing and reading memory down to the molecular level, but also at the cultural level. And that perhaps the field or this thing that Allan's referring to is the result of the emergent phenomena of this happening on an imaginably large scale, at all scales simultaneously. And we're coming into awareness of this field, of this immense thing that literally carpets the peaks and valleys of probability itself. And that a clear intention from the mind with a clear and open heart, if Joe Dispenza is right, shapes the probabilistic field of likelihood in a group, in a non-local way, in a temporally unhooked way. And that we can do testing of this before we understand it. We can utilize it. So like the electricity was used for 70 years before we had a model of what electrons actually were. So perhaps the HumanOS in the SuperOS that is running on the substrate of life is becoming denser and more coherent so that we can actually interface with it faster. So, you know, an example is my life. You know, today, Catherine had been saying we need to get 2 more cats. We need to get 2 more cats. We have this rambunctious cat that Aaron and Charles helped me pick up that was throwing up in his truck. And we dragged this cat, this kitten back from Trinity County from our friend Mike's little spot there. And the community here has thought we need two more cats. And suddenly this morning, a friend at a nursery in the Carmel area sent a picture of 2 cats that have been dropped off at the nursery. And often people do drop off these kinds of things in boxes at nurseries for some reason. And he sent a video, and we went and picked these cats up an hour and a half later in Scotts Valley. And we had these cats on our chests half an hour later, bottle feeding them because they're only 3 weeks old. They were abandoned by their mother somehow. And you have to stroke their little parts to get them to poop and pee. I mean, you have to do everything, you know. But the miracle of these cats they're the perfect cats that we had seen in the vision, in our hope, that just materialized, and that we're finding as we build this community here at H and Oaks, things are happening faster and faster and faster. And intention goes out, heartfelt intention, a vision goes out, and bang, it's replied to, and it's like getting an Amazon package the next day. It's just like boom, tension out, bam, boom, 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 faster and faster and faster. The tool, the OS is working better and better and delivering and delivering and delivering. And we're just surfing this wave of probability, and like things are just manifesting. It's just incredible. If you're in that still heart space that Gino was talking about, and that Dorian was bringing us in with his music, from that space you can surf that wave. You can put requests and SQL queries into it from clarity, and it hears you and it responds.
It's
And
interactive.
perhaps that's the great tool we have.
Does it have a built-in instruction manual, the OS?
You know, one of the things that I've taken on as my next journey in my life is to actually maybe write that instruction manual in collaboration with a lot of people and make some testable hypotheses, make some predictions, because I'm a science geek. And if this is a real thing, we've got testable predictions and we can test it in the laboratory of life and we can characterize it. And that's the way to make it land. And yeah, so I'm talking with Claudia Wells tomorrow, the board chair of IONS, and we may be having a session on June 5th, by the way, with Dean Radin and Julia Mossbridge. So on the IONS online programs, and I propose that we talk about this field and how to write the instruction and testing manual for it, the customer support manual for the field. And I think Dean's been working on this as long as anybody. And Julia does all her work on precognition, which is kind of a really wonderful aspect of it. So I hope you guys can join us for that IONS webinar on the 5th of June.
And Dan Herbert's a big friend of Dean, and he would have input on that too, I do believe. And also, I have an offer for you and everyone there. As you may or may not know, the Augmented World Expo is going on this week in Silicon Valley, which is the biggest event on augmented and virtual reality people and all the things that are happening. And this whole COVID thing has really pushed a lot of stuff forward with that. And it's usually several $100s to go to it, but I'll give you a special code that will allow you to get in for free. Everybody there who, if you really want to, if you like to go. Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's Augmented World Expo. The website is AWE.
Yeah, put it in the chat, Alan.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat with the code, okay? And
What time of the day is the ION seminar with Claudia and everybody on the 5th, Bruce?
June 5th, and I think it's at 11 o'clock in the morning. But we can send you email so everybody can get into that.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'd like to go to that.
So Shen-Shen, I think we have 15 minutes left, and are there any more?
There's an interesting congruence of the tech people.
Any more people with their thumbs up? I thought I saw Melissa with her thumbs in the air.
Yes, so we have Max and Juliana who raised their hand in the list, and then Melissa raised her actual hand. So maybe
here.
we can get those three in.
Here, before we go to these wonderful questions, take a look at these kittens. So you can get them in front of the camera. There they are.
Hi, sweetie. Can you see? Oh, he's making a lot of noise.
This one's a loud one. So this is what we're calling this one EXO.
Maybe we have a new couple of names to play with. What do you think about Timothy and Terrence?
No, they'll become troublemakers. That's the problem. That's EXO.
True. Hi everyone. Mwah, mwah.
This is Valerie Iceman. And wow, this is a super loud one.
Here.
Okay.
Just keep him in there.
Keep him on the cushion. So he's got a little face.
Oh, I can see it. They're so young. They're maybe 3 weeks old.
So cute.
All right, may you all find the kittens you're meant to find.
This is Catherine. This is Iceman.
Hi everyone.
Oh, wonderful. Hey, Melissa's got hers.
Yep, we have so 3 more people, Max, Juliana, and then Melissa.
Well, I don't know how I could possibly follow that. Well, Bruce, I was pleased to see that we were going to be discussing this topic tonight, because I've been actually getting my paperwork together for social work programs, and I know we've discussed this in the past, and I seem to recall you expressed to me that you thought that at least the institutional academic psychoanalysis work maybe hasn't been as advanced as some of the healing groups that you've been a part of outside the Citadel, let's say. And I've been interested in different modalities of therapy, and I've actually found a lot of benefit from what I characterize as a clinical hypnosis approach, which seems to come from a different epistemology than anything else I've looked at. It takes more of a limbic system approach to looking at past trauma. And I guess kind of the pattern I'm seeing is that there seems to be all these different schools of thought popping up outside the institution in different communities. I know that you've found a lot of value in your Luminous Awareness group, and I'm just curious about how these groups may come back together again, if there may be something like a GitHub style approach to compiling the human operating system, as you call it, from these different schools of thought and different epistemologies.
That's a brilliant, Max, a brilliant conception. And we need a wonderful, young, flexible-minded person, crystal bender and realm bender, perhaps, who can create, similar to how Ken Wilber built all his maps of everything. This guy was amazing, and somebody to map out all of these practices. And one of our members, Michael McDonald, perhaps he's the one. I mean, he does this. He says, this is related to that, and this technique comes in here, and it comes from this history and has this effect. And so Michael is actually doing this kind of meta work on all these systems. But perhaps we do need a GitHub approach.
All right, next up is Juliana.
Unmute me. Hi, everybody. I wish to thank everyone for all of their comments. I've just been taking it in. I'm looking forward to digesting all of this after our gathering. And Bruce, thank you so much for sharing in such transparency your experience and how you're relating with your inner kindergarten. And it's so refreshing to me to be able to come into this circle and find a language for experiences that that I can relate to throughout my life. The language of realming, the language of the field, the language of downloads, the language of how to integrate and emerge the self in alignment with all of what is the quilt. I call it a quilt. That's kind of the language I've kind of adapted, the quilt of who we are. And I really hope that we can continue when we have more time to dialogue. I'm happy, so happy to hear about what ION's doing as far as looking into, and about having actually a manual and mapping something like what Wilbur did, mapping something about this landscape. And for those who I haven't met yet here, I met Bruce at the ION conference, and I felt an alignment. And that's basically how I relate to my experiences. I follow the synchronicities. They reassure that the alignment is happening, and we literally like cross paths. And then later, I shared this with Catherine and Bruce. There was downloads of information about actual physical places that I hadn't been to yet through our connection, that I had drawn up and I pulled it out. So it's just, I just want to thank, and I want to leave more time. I know there's one more person after me, but I really hope we can take the threads of what we've been discussing here and look closer at them, so that we can learn how to continue to alchemize the inner experience, how to transmute that, and then do the Jedi work that's in the immediate moment that's called forth. And I really appreciate how you expressed that we do it quietly. And it was just so profound, that message that came through. So I think that's enough of my sharing right now, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana. It's good to see you here again.
Good to be here. Really good to be here. Yes. And I appreciate the gentleman. I'm getting to know all the names here that mentioned about the body and bringing the body into alignment with these experiences, and about the breathing, the breath, and being able to witness you, the experience of you, and how you described these breath practices. It's an embodied experience. One of the concerns I had when I embarked on this work, and I believe it was Durian, I hope I'm saying that name correctly at the beginning, touched on, was in the resolution and integration of the traumas, do we lose superpowers? And one of my teachers reassured me, no. We just begin to master them and learn how to be more skillful with them. And that was really encouraging, to be able to know that we can still have our experience and be more whole in it.
Yeah, well said. That's a good point, Juliana. And I feel that now that much of my hysteric wound is really in the past, it's really quiet, that my realming got beautiful. All of that happened as I was able to then realm back to life's origins. And it was so crystal clear. It was just a perfect union when it happened. And I knew it's because I had gone through the healing just before. The teacher had shown me how I was conceived and born. And then I turned in a moment and took us both back to the first protocell of that one amazing night. But it came on the backside of the healing, came the revealing. And so the immediate gift of the understanding and healing of that wound and the relaxing of the protectors and the doers and everyone was then chill sitting on the couch. We could now journey and we could do the real stupendous realming work just moments later. I mean, it was such a reward. You know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, the floor is yours, Melissa.
Hi. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you all. And this has been the most pleasurable, and it's been my first time to have a huge group as far as Zoom. I've been studying Bruce for quite a while, and he knows who I am just through my upbringing, which was part of the origins to some of the LSD movement and some of, well, what it was all about, and not just, wasn't just a big party. There was a lot of psychotherapy that was involved, and the two people that were involved were my father, Peter Dema, and Leon Tabori. And so I'm just a product of, not just, but I am a product of those guys. And I wanted to say, Bruce, congratulations on your endeavors for as far as your commune, not really commune, but like just what you were saying on a couple of your other programs, that everybody kind of needs to have that program and think that way. It's hard to do. I also had a long line. First of all, in my upbringing, I was in one of the communes was called the Flower Farm, and it was a correlation of when we had the barn as well in Scotts Valley, and that was a huge. Speaking of Jefferson Airplane, they were there, and so I've been around that commune type of environment, and I go back just like you do, Bruce, but I go back to when I was like 2.5 years old. And the most joy that I can remember is living in like that. And no matter what, I can smell it still. And I removed myself from it by moving into the corporate, I gotta survive world, but I'm here, I am, I made it, and now I have enough time to do this kind of thing, being retired, basically. So, but I wanted to congratulate you on the your living situation and your new journeys as far as your home, and what a good idea for whatever happens, whatever wave comes. You guys have a rock, and you have a crew, and it takes a village, and that saying just goes so far. So I live in the St. George downtown. Santa Cruz, and it is like a big mansion with roommates, basically. So as far as I remember, Dennis also, I think this was the prior podcast, was he was very skeptical about like everybody just being able to think this way that you're thinking, Bruce. And he was asking a lot of questions, and he said the yeah buts one too many times. I was wondering where he was tonight. I guess he didn't sign on, and I hope that he can acquire some kind of a little bit more hope. I guess it's more of the pessimistic scientific mind. I'm not sure. Mm. But Bruce, I also want to tell you, another question is, do scientists believe in psychic abilities? Or because you cued in on me today. So let's just say that I'm glad to be here, and thank you very much for doing that. And it's perfect timing. And thank you all too. It's nice to meet you. Look forward to the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And yeah. I'll always remember your father was at Allan & Sons Beach House, Leon Tabori, who founded the Hip Pocket Bookstore in Santa Cruz, which was sort of the first sort of hippie countercultural center, along with the Catalyst Club. And then there's Leon Tabori, and Leon and your father, Peter Dema, were in Allan & Sons Beach House. And there was one moment, and we were doing, we showed some films from the communes here in the valley. And it was great. It was a meeting of generations.
Right.
And then something seemed to happen to your father, and his eyes bulged out. And I thought, is he having a heart attack? And I went and grabbed Allan. Allan, you probably remember this. And before we were able to, like, do we need to call an ambulance? Peter Dema's like stiff, and his eyes are bulging out.
Oh my God.
And Leon said, I know this guy for 50 years. You know how Leon's voice was.
That must have been like not the last meeting that you all had. Was it around that time or?
Yeah, it was really about 6 months before Leon's death.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this guy for 50 years.
Yeah.
He's going to be all right. He just smoked a bit too much. You know, he was like gone because I don't know, something, but he wasn't dying.
He did have a stroke. That was after Peter's stroke, my father's stroke, right? So he had, those were his final looks. And when I had him in my arms, and he just passed away 5 years ago in August. So that look was probably not too far off, because he had a stroke before that, and I don't think he was doing any drugs at that party. And you know, he pretty much wasn't able to because of the stroke, and his left arm was paralyzed. So I don't know if that you saw. I don't
know what it was, but but just the contrast of these dear old friends that known each other for 50 years and had pulled each other through so much.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And man, and this was the generation of the Eleusinian return. These were the people who brought us so much from the counterculture of Santa Cruz and the Bay Area, but they had created such a revolution because they'd found the magic elixirs. They found their kaikion, and they had the right moment in history and the right place and the right set and setting, and they cracked it open for us after, you know, almost 1,800, 1,600 years. And so it was a great pleasure to hang around with them and to connect to that. And they're also bizarre and funny human beings. So I don't know how that would have been hanging around with hierophants back in Eleusis. Maybe they were just as trickstery and jokestery as Leon and your father. But
definitely. I thought maybe that was like a point when, if you'd known him long enough, if you'd known him like say 25 years ago or like 30 years, when he would, you know, he would drop a hit of acid, you know, and then he would just dissipate like wherever we were. And, you know, I didn't know where he went, but like, I thought that was going to be in correlation of what but when you said they knew each other for 50 years, yeah, Leon was a wonderful, wonderful person. They both did bring almost just about everything here that they could to Santa Cruz, and as far as you know, arts and history, and equality was my dad's, you know, dying day. That was his rant, basically, forever. And he passed away with everybody with a lot of love. People loved him a lot. But yeah, and to look into that, you guys, if you ever wanted to look up the HIP Santa Cruz, was, you know, the book Ralph Abraham did. And
there's 5 books. If you go to Santa Cruz Hip History Project website, it's the whole story is there, and the 5th book has just been completed, and it's interviews with all these amazing innovators, like revolutionaries, that are getting more and more recognized. And yeah, and I know this could go on and on.
It could, okay. I'll stop now, though, but because I know this is the last of the session, probably around you. It seems like, I don't know how long we've been on, but I really love all you guys. I pass the love around, and I'm taking it downtown. I'm taking the whole thing wherever I go downtown to spread to the people, because there's a lot of attitude out there. This is what, to me, the city, right? This is like the city, and I'm just working my works the best that I can. And I think that, you know, right now, just to be a good example to anybody that just doesn't give a shit, it doesn't matter. We have to get over it. Everybody else, and deal with what we can do, what we can do.
What we're doing with all these recordings, so from Melissa and everyone, Levity Salon number 4, which Allan Lundell did a wonderful edit on and put music on, and Aaron is now finishing up the intro and outro and some more edits. That'll go out in the Levity Zone podcast, probably the end of the week, and you can subscribe at levityzone.org or on your device. It'll be a podcast number 73. So please subscribe, and you'll hear, it's my personal diary, really, from the early 90s of all this whole journey. And some of them are set to music, some of them are performances, some of them are story, some of them are conversations. But please sign up for the Levity Zone podcast. It's been around for 8 years, and the Levity Salon is now feeding it. So we'll have the audio for Levity Salon 5, 6, and 7 coming up on the podcast as well. And we've got about 1,200 people, not huge, but it's growing. And we call it Levity because of a man that I used to hang around with named Sasha Shulgin. And he was sort of the father, a great alchemist, the father of a lot of the tools of levity, one of them being MDMA and 2CB and these various tools of levity. But the main thing for him was this blue eyes, that even when late in life he couldn't see, there was a sparkling, shining levity coming out of Sasha Shulgin as we would sit with him at the house there. He was in pure joy. He was in the state that Gino talks about, this persistent state of joy of just being. And just to look into those sightless but radiantly flowering, flowing eyes was to be in a shower of levity. So, and the second reason I call it Levity Zone is because one night in a conversation with Terence McKenna, he was worried about too much novelty and, eschatons and the end of the world in 2012. But he was fascinated by science and the internet and things like this. And at one point I said to Terence, we have enough novelty. We need more levity. And we both laughed on that. So that's why I just called it that. And if we have levity, we have peace, we have leisure, we can find love, we can find the balance of the hands, we can find equanimity, we can connect with the field and shape the future and all that. And I think levity is a good little term. And we can also not take ourselves that seriously, because if we take ourselves too seriously, get too heavy, things just bog down. So I think levity is a working term for moment-to-moment existence in the 2020s. Let's make it and now they're calling it the rolling 20s, right? Not the roaring 20s. Let's make it the levity, or the 20s of the decade of levity, despite all of what's happening. We'll just be another example, just like countercultural crazy tricksters of 50 years ago did the same thing. And with that, and Shen-Shen, do you want to take us out? Are we done for the evening?
Yeah, I can stop the recording. And maybe we can all unmute ourselves and say goodbye for the night.
Yeah, we'll get that on the recording.
Okay, all right.
Hey.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Thanks very much. Great field work.
Much love.
Field work, that's a good term.
Nothing
Bye.
more low than a bottle
Good.
fishing.
Bye.
Larry, send me your sketches.
Good night.
Good to
Thank you. Kitty love.
Did a lot tonight.
Sky Tori is my partner, by the way.
Aw.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bonne nuit.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Nazdravi. Nazdar.
Giant.
Buongiorno. Oh, no, that's hello. That's good day, isn't it?
Amamagogo one Kichu.
Oh,
One of those Quechua.
Quechua. Oh my gosh. That's a beautiful saying. Can you say it again, Selena?
Amamagogo one Kichu.
Does that mean have a barbecued guinea pig?
It means I will never forget you.
Never forget you. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's the best one yet.
Mm-hmm.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. We'll get the recording. Hopefully Zoom will have recorded us to the cloud, so we have this clearly.
So those two cats just appeared today?
That's what it sounded like.
Wow.
So you didn't turn off your computer, so you're still there.
Bottle-fed kittens grow up to be the most affectionate cat.
Bottle-fed kittens, yeah. We're counting on that because Nugget's a bit of a monster.
My wife rescued one that was 3 weeks old and had to nurse him back to health. He lived to be 19.
Whoa.
He was a great cat.
You haven't introduced the new cats to Nugget yet, right?
No, that's waiting. So Nugget's staying with Shane down in his RV, and we're gonna have them in the. They only got here this morning, so we got to get them bigger. And then, but Nugget's got his work cut out for him by these foxes. So there's a fox family with 3 pups, 3 kits, and he was chased by the mother like at high speed the other day. I think that the mother's using Nugget as the prey bait trainer for these young foxes.
Wow.
Mother's using what?
Nugget is the cat that is here, the orange one. And so Shane saw him traveling at the speed of light, chased by a fox. Yeah, because they're kind of they're like, who do we train with for the hunt? Well, it's Nugget. I don't think Nugget's going to get eaten, but
I was going to train Nugget that, Nugget's not the top of the food chain, that's for sure. Nugget's been the top of the food chain since January.
Yep. Oh, God.
That's cool.
Roads change. Nugget having to be run from the fox? Yeah.
Yeah, those foxes, I mean, they're pretty amazing. And we have baby turkeys, baby foxes, baby kittens, baby fawns, baby peacocks here, quail. What else? I mean, they're just I've never seen anything like this here. The amount of flowers. The bamboo are having corn, where they corn out, and then they have the tassels of yellow pollen, and there are billion bees all over them. They're flowering.
No.
Now the bamboo are flowering. We've never seen flowers like this. We've never seen the vibrancy that's happening here right now.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you again, Bruce. Excellent discussion tonight.
Always a pleasure.
See you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Good day, Charles.
Okay, hopefully Shen-Shen, it will, do you have to stop it, or do you just close?
Right.